What's up, Gearheads and Hype Tunes? It's Captain Barbosa, and we're going to settle this once and for all. Gears 1 or Gears 3? Let's do it. Gears of War 1 comes out in 2006. It showed up at MLG in June, at the Meadowlands in 2007. And we have Gears of War until November 2008, which is about a year and a half. It felt like it was longer because the game came out way before it actually made it onto the circuit. But you know what? It sounds like, and it feels like, we had Gears of War 1 around for 2 years. What made Gears of War 1 amazing was the show, the spectacle, and the amount of teams participating. At the time for MLG, it was about 64 teams. And there was a waiting list to get into the event just in case one of those teams dropped out. That's pretty amazing compared to what's been happening in Gears of War 3. Now, the one thing I will say about Gears of War 1 is the Gears of War 1 guys in the OG say, hey, we made that scene. You know what? I think that scene was given to you as Gears of War 1 players, because the hype and the production value that you got wasn't Gears created, that was Halo. Now, Halo was the big game on MLG, and if it wasn't for all that hype that Halo created, and all of a sudden Gears of War came out, MLG was like, you know what, this actually works, because this game is also 4v4. In our video production workflow, we can just kind of copy and paste over to Gears, and all the monitors, and all the projectors, and all the captures, and all the streams, everything works. Let's do Gears. It's also a really good idea because they're doing good with Microsoft Studios, because both games were published by Microsoft Studios and they're both Xbox exclusives. We had Gears of War 1 for a year and a half, 64 teams were showing up to these events, and we had some great gameplay, we had some great matches, we had great teams come out of that era, and then it kind of ended in November 2008 when Gears of War 2 was on the way. There was MLG in Las Vegas, which was the last big Gears of War LAN, and after Las Vegas, it was over. Now, Gears of War 2 comes around. It was already out for 2 weeks by the time they had MLG Vegas in 2008. So now it's time to transition to Gears of War 2. And now we have to talk about Gears of War 2 because it seeps into Gears of War 3, or I really wouldn't consider it. So this is GoW1 versus GoW3, but let's talk about Gears 2. Gears 2 shows up, and Gears 2 causes problems. However, the game and the population expanded. They lifted that limit from 64 teams to 128, and we were getting about 120 teams showing up to events. But there was problems. The game wasn't fantastic. There was weird quirks. You know, we had the smoke stuns and the ragdolls. And let's start with the hammerburst as a default weapon, because that was a great idea. So the problems, the inconsistency, the haggles, the aggravation, that just kind of killed the game, because you wanted a consistent game, a consistent experience, and you didn't want to feel like you were gambling when you went to go to a competitive event. You wanted your skill to shine through. Moving on, Gears of War 2 kind of started flopping because there's problems with the game. Now, I would still, once again, want to point out that both of those scenes, Gears of War 1 and Gears of War 2, were given to the player base by MLG. They did not have their own LANs. They weren't setting up local scenes. It was pretty much straight to MLG. You go, get your seeding points, get in the open bracket, get in the championship bracket, and go. Enter Gears of War 3. Also enter Hypefestation. So Gears 2 is now out of the scene. And now we're waiting for our third game, Gears of War 3. And for the longest, there was no announcement. Everybody was like, hey, is MLG going to pick it up? Is MLG going to pick it up? This is Gears of War 3. This is going to be huge. Is MLG going to do it? There was actually a show match between developers and players at Raleigh at MLG right before the game came out. But that was pretty much a big tease. I think it's because they were in Raleigh. Epic Games was down the street. Show off your new game. That's some good press and good attention for the event. They went back and played Halo. And that was the last time we really saw main stage Gears of War at MLG. So Gears 3 comes out September 20th, 2011. I gave Caesar a call, aka CDN, and I'm like, hey C's, I know you're up to something with Gears. What is it? Because I want in. Caesar was like, yo, Bose, how do you know this? How do you know? What do you know? You tapping my phone call? What's going on here? How do you know this? Well, I just took an educated guess because Caesar was a huge personality in Gears, and he's been competing since Gears 1, and he also came off Ultimate Gamer, so his popularity was pretty up there. I figured he would be doing something, so I called him. Enter Hypefestation. we do a LAN tournament 1 month after the game is released. It's a small invitational in Franklin Square, Long Island, and we had our first 16-team invitational. And we wanted to do this before MLG actually made a decision because it gave us at least some spotlight on the situation. Well, we had our 16-team LAN on 2 stations in Long Island. It was time for a bigger one immediately. Before the event was even over, all the sponsors and everyone involved, Beyond Gaming, Astro, Twitch, they wanted another LAN. So we had Hypefestation 2 in January 2012, which was arguably the biggest Hypefestation LAN we've had with prize money and stations available. However, it wasn't perfect. What the community did not understand after Hypefestation 2 was that we were you. Essentially, we were Gears of War gamers putting on a show and a production for other Gears of War gamers. We were not MLG, we did not have investor money, we didn't have many financial resources, and we didn't have a stable of Xboxes to provide for you guys to have LANs across the country. It was a local crowd, New Jersey, New York based. That's what we had to deal with. We went to Newark, New Jersey, had a great event. We had international teams come in. What happened? Well, the scene probably would have grown if the people involved running Hypefestation weren't so beat up and unappreciated. Caesar kind of took it personally that a lot of people were complaining about the event rather than appreciating that we actually had something. And Caesar put in a lot of time and a lot of money into the event. Caesar had one of those moments. Is it worth it? And he backed out because it wasn't for him. There was a bunch of us involved figuring out how do we do another LAN? How do we top the last one? Because we can't go smaller, we could only go bigger. But we didn't have the resources to go bigger because the game wasn't as popular as we expected it to be. And I guess that's because of that runoff from Gears of War 2 and the fact that it wasn't really picked up by the MLG circuit because everybody was filling time with Hypefestation. Like, yeah, I'll go to Hypefestation 1, I'll go to Hypefestation 2, and then finally MLG will pick it up. Guess what? MLG never picked it up. Most of the players were a little distraught that MLG never picked it up and didn't think playing the game was super worth it, especially for the prize money and the audience that we were able to gather. Sponsors were not flocking to Gears of War anymore because the numbers and the presentation, everything wasn't up there. I mean, MLG gave Gears of War an excellent standard, and then they dropped the game. I also want to point out, let's do some little history here. When Gears of War 1 came out back in 2006 and 2007, when it was on the circuit, what other games was it competing up against? What other competitive scene was out there? I mean, you had Counter-Strike, and then you had the Koreans playing StarCraft 1 like superstars. But really, there was not a saturated market. By 2010, 2011, we now have a saturated market of a lot of games. Counter-Strike, Halo, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 made its debut in 2011, and that took the scene by storm because that's essentially when Call of Duty took off on consoles and really into the mainstream. So now we have to compete with all these other games as esports. Who's really going to be looking at Gears? All right, so let's finish with Judgment. So here's what I did that was stupid. I got laid off. I got a severance check. I still believed in the Gears of War community. I took my severance check and put it into a deposit for Gears of War, an event in Raleigh, right down the street from Epic Games, because I wanted to convince them that trying to create a game for esports would be beneficial to them, and that way the whole development team could come down and watch it. Now, Raleigh has had MLGs in it. I put a deposit into a rock concert venue, and you know what? The community and everyone was so confused and discombobulated about, should we be playing Judgment? I don't like the maps. I don't like the weapon balancing. I don't, and I do like the movement at the same time. Should we play Gears of War 3 at the event? Should we play GoW Judgment at the event? And then the mega bomb hit, where guess what? The new consoles for the next generation were announced. And it was at that moment that Barbosa knew he fucked up. No one cared what we were doing with Gears of War 3 once that dropped. We have new consoles, new games coming out, a whole new culture, a whole new scene, new development. It was just like on the interest of Gears Judgment or Gears 3. Who knows what we were going to do, but we weren't going with big numbers and we weren't going with big sponsors because that just killed all the buzz that we may have had. I wish I could offer you guys more. I wish I could have. If this was a stable game like Call of Duty, I wish I liked Call of Duty, because if I did, chances are we'd have plenty of money and plenty of resources to do Gears right next to Call of Duty. So here we are, guys. Hypefestation is holding events where 18 to 28 teams are showing up, a really inconsistent number, a really inconsistent amount of players, and not a lot of audience. We're just doing this as a fan service. I like you guys. Our staff likes you guys. We like watching Gears of War. This is why we're doing it. But you have to be crazy to think that we were going to be able to grow. We just didn't have the help or the resources to do it. I know I've had like 4 years of Gears of War competitive gaming experience, but I needed to do other things that were doing better than Gears of War, so that way I could have brought that back. Did I have the time to do that? I did not, and I didn't have the help either. To conclude this whole video, Gears of War 1 was given, keyword given, the opportunity to compete. They had 64 teams showing up at events. It lasted for about a year and a half. Great gameplay, great teams, great spectators, great audience. Then you have Gears of War 2, bigger team list, initially a bigger audience, but it tanked because of gameplay, and the community never was able to hold up or revert back to Gears of War 1 because they depended on MLG in the circuit so much. No one was doing their own thing. It was MLG's game, pretty much, for competitive interest. And then in Gears of War 3, it was Hypefestation. We don't have MLG, but we have each other. And it was essentially Gears of War players producing events for Gears of War players, but we were getting destroyed on appreciation because, well, why aren't you like MLG? Why don't you feel like MLG? I want to go to MLG, but why don't you guys feel like that? Why aren't you like MLG? Why can't you be MLG? Why doesn't MLG have us? Gears of War 1. Essentially, it was the best competitive scene that Gears of War ever had. And when the Gears of War 1 guys sound like they have a chip on their shoulder, like there's all these new kids in Gears of War 3 thinking they're all this and that, well, you should have been battling through 64 teams years ago like I was doing when it took me however many matches it took me to get to the grand finals and win. You guys are nothing. You got to win like 4 or 5 matches and you're done. You win your tournament. Big deal. And the money's not even there. So my argument for each one is Gears of War 1. Great scene. Probably the best scene Gears of War has ever had. Gears of War 3. It was built by us. So what are you more proud of? The fact that MLG gave you 64 team tournaments and all the resources to do that? Or are you proud that you're part of the new budding Gears of War 3 scene, that we were able to be self-sufficient, kind of, with the help of my paycheck, and run our own events? It's up to you. Discuss it in the comments. But that's where we're at. So you guys should not be hating on each other. You guys should not be ripping each other. If you started in Gears of War 3, why don't you find one of the OGs that loves Gears of War 1 and turn on your Xbox 360, pop in your Gears of War 1 disc, and have a good time with them. And for you Gears of War 1 guys, stop hating on the new kids because they don't know any better or they're learning. Why don't you educate them like I'm doing right now and tell them, hey, you know, Gears of War 3 is cool and you had the Hypefestation in this whole scene, but we had Gears of War 1 and 64 teams at MLG, and that's why we're like, you're really not as awesome as you think you are. That's it for me. I've said my piece. Gears of War 1, greatest competitive scene for Gears of War. However, we had Gears of War 3 because we had a passionate community that wanted to compete. I will let you guys debate in the comment section below. That's it from me. Captain out.